Hi, on a Wednesday, a heat wave Wednesday in Jerusalem where it's over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, I say welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic, and I'm here as per usual with my co-host Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, you're right. It's very hot, but in more ways than one. I think we really need to discuss the fact that today is the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day is on a different date, and ours is set for a week before Memorial Day for Fallen Soldiers and Victims of Terrorism, which falls on the eve of Independence Day. And this isn't by accident. It was done on purpose to remind us of rising from the ashes to being resurrected in the modern state of Israel, etc. And this year, we need to talk about the significance of Holocaust remembrance in a post-October 7th world and Israel, and an ongoing war that's been going for a year and a half now.
So obviously we'll get to all that, but if you'll allow me, I can also tell you that Holocaust Remembrance Day is also very personal for my family. 10 days ago, it was the 80th anniversary of my father's liberation. My father was a German Jew in hiding, and on the 13th of April 1945, he was liberated by the American 9th Army, by the 102nd Division, the famous Ozarks. If there's any Ozark listening, thank you. I wouldn't be here without you. And my father spent the war years in very precarious situations, and he was lucky to have survived. And we always remember that. He once said that, Friday the 13th for him was a very lucky day. And he remembered his liberation. And there's something we didn't understand as children, we only understood much later on. He swapped the Jewish star that he was forced to wear with the Ozark Division emblem. And he kept wearing that, not to work, obviously, where he had to wear a suit. But on weekends, he'd wear a sports shirt, and he had it sewn on the sleeve. And when the sports shirt, became old and frail, he'd take it off and ask my mother to sew it on the next shirt until he wore it until he died. It was with him when he died. And obviously, people have important dates in their life, the day they got born, their birthday, obviously, and the day they get married and so forth and so on, the day their first child was born. But for my father, April 13th, 1945 was a crucial day. And through that, the Holocaust was always there. Maybe it wasn't front and center, but it was always in the background as we were growing up as children.
Well, interestingly, your father ended up in Australia, and a report just this week pointed out that Australia is one of the places in the world where there is a massive surge in Jew hatred, which is very surprising given Australia's nature, character. But it is, in fact, one of those places. On October 7th, rather than having the world sympathize with the Jews, empathize with the Jews, especially in light of every Holocaust memorial, museum, classes, education all over the world, we quip very sort of morbidly that everybody loves dead Jews, so it's great to have memorials. But then October 7th had the opposite effect. There was a huge upswing in anti-Semitism that exploded on October 8th, before Israel even retaliated for the mass atrocities of October 7th, 2023. But also, I think what's relevant is something that you told me before we came on air, and that has to do with your gratitude to the U.S. Army. But you also pointed out something that was, it came too late.
Two things I want to respond to. The first thing about Australia, the Jews and most of the Australian Jewish community were what was called at the time post-war refugees, people who left Europe after the Holocaust. Before the Holocaust, Australia wasn't so good on letting Jews in. There's even a famous Australian leader who says, we don't have a Jewish problem, why would we want to import one? I think I'm quoting him directly, but maybe not. And Australia, Jews went to Australia because it was the furthest place from Europe that could be imagined, and it is. I've just done the flight.
It's sort of like the furthest place from everywhere.
And Australia was a country of immigration, and so there were Jews, and there were Greeks, and there were Italians, and
like
so
America.
you were just another ethnic group. And the idea that somehow you'd have this resurgence of anti-Semitism in a place like Australia is, for many Australian Jews, and I know from my own family, it's something that is profoundly shocking and troubling. On the issue of the United States, which is more geopolitical, you're correct. We spoke about it on the way up to Jerusalem, that though I, of course, thank all those brave Americans who fought, and many of them died, to defeat Nazism and end the Holocaust, and to win the Second World War, and to end Hitler's rule of terror, yes? And we've all seen the movie Saving Private Ryan about D-Day, and the immensity of the American sacrifice is clear. And I think of those young men in the Ozark Division, yes, who fought their way through France into Germany and took heavy casualties. And they saved my father, so I have such gratitude. But I'm also aware that while America, made a huge sacrifice to help win the war against Hitler, saving Jews was not necessarily a top priority. And we know that because in 1944, when Roosevelt and all the leaders of his administration knew about Auschwitz and the industrial murder of tens of thousands of Jews, almost day in, day out. And when the deportation of the Hungarian Jews was imminent, and we're talking about 500,000 Jews that were still alive in Hungary in 1944, there was a possibility to stop the genocide, to bomb the railway links to the death camp, to bomb Auschwitz itself. We know that the American Air Force, who was then stationed already in Italy, was bombing industrial sites around Auschwitz. They could have just as easily bombed Auschwitz. And though the idea was suggested, and there were Jewish community leaders in the United States who I don't want to say demanded, but said this is the right thing to do, it was never done. It was never a priority. And if we want to be philosophical, you can look about Yom HaShoah, the Israel Independence Day, which is coming up next week. There is one country in the world now that says saving Jewish life is a priority, and that's the Jewish state. That's the state of Israel. It wasn't a priority in 1944 and in 1945.
Ironically, the business of whether you bomb the camps. Now, remember, if you had bombed those camps, the reason for not doing so is not the same reason that Israel is not bombing indiscriminately in Gaza for fear of killing hostages and innocents in Gaza, if there are such people, but that's a different discussion. At the time, had the United States done that, had bombed the camps, you realize they would have also killed some of the people who ended up surviving and being liberated from Auschwitz. So we have this ironic situation here where Israelis are saying, don't just bomb, because then the hostages in Gaza, the Jews in Gaza, will be in danger of being killed. So we're in this kind of catch situation. But you also mentioned here, we have this issue right now in Israel. There's this huge, we see this, there's a big division, there's a big split in society over how to proceed with this war. And you have a camp that says, okay, end the war, get the hostages back, and later worry about defeating Hamas, which of course is nonsense. It's impossible. As Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed out a few days ago, he said, we can't do that because we would give international guarantees that we're not resuming the war. And this isn't something that Israel does, give guarantees and then backtracks on them. But the other side, everybody wants the hostages home, of course. But there's the other side that says, no, first of all, we cannot leave Hamas in power. And we have to put more pressure on Hamas in order for Hamas to agree to release hostages, if not all of them, at least as many alive as possible. So we have this big split. There are other fights going on in the country, as you know, over the courts, over everything political. But I would just like to say, while a lot of Israelis on either side are saying, oh, it's never been this bad, and there's this internal strife, and it's terrible, especially during a war, I'd like to bring us back to the Holocaust and say, you realize that during the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were totally split ideologically, politically, morally. They were not in agreement about what to do there. So if they could have been split inside the Warsaw Ghetto with the Nazis surrounding them, it shouldn't be surprising to us that this is happening now in Israel.
Look, Jews are an opinionated people, and everyone's got their own opinion, and we like to argue. It's almost a national trait. But you are right. Even in the darkest of circumstances, when the Jews that remained in the Warsaw Ghetto, after most of them had been sent to Treblinka to be murdered, yes, but those who remained revolted, and they rose up against the Nazis, and actually their revolt from a tactical point of view was successful. They held the Nazis off for days before the might of the German military actually crushed the revolt. I think it was close to a month. And why do I say this? Because we grew up, at least I grew up, and we were told, and it was in the Israeli textbooks as well, that the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto revolt was Mordechai Nalevich, who was the leader of the Hashomer Tzair, and this revolt, which included Jews who were from other labor Zionist organizations and from the Bund, and even some Jewish communists were involved in fighting the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. But what wasn't made part of the official narrative was there was also a Beitar part of that. This was all became more clear after research by former Israeli foreign minister and defense minister Moshe Aarons, who wrote a book a few years ago. He called it Flags Over the Warsaw Ghetto, where he tried to compensate for the lack of official attention that the other people received. And I think of it, in the time of the Holocaust, the Jews are being sent to be exterminated in Treblinka. There's a revolt by Jews who are fighting to try to save their own lives, but also to save for Jewish pride, that we can stand up to our oppressors. And even then, they had two separate organizations. It says something about Jews that maybe is inbuilt.
Yes, since the time of the Bible, this is an ancient. It's in Jewish DNA, probably. Now, that's not to say that it's not worrisome that there are splits and protests, etc., right now, especially now. But I will say, there's a difference between the politicians, the intellectuals, the people in TV studios battling this out, and the soldiers in the field and their families. And I know this from personal experience. And I will say that the soldiers are not split. It's not to say they don't have diverging political opinions. Of course they do. It's a cross-section of society. Every soldier has his own opinion, but when you talk to them, what they're focused on is fighting the enemy. They feel it's their duty. They are proud of it. They're also scared or devastated when their comrades get killed or wounded. There's a whole different flavor to the people who are doing the actual service. And I think sometimes we totally forget that. And I also would like to point out that because everybody is so worried about the hostages, and rightly so, we forget all of the soldiers who were killed and many who were wounded. If you forget for a minute about all the hundreds who were killed searching for the hostages and some rescuing, you have a whole slew of young men and women in rehab, in hospitals, in rehab, who have lost limbs, who have become brain damaged, who have lost their sight or their hearing. They're still months and months in hospital. and they get very little attention. And I think it's very sad because, you know, the hostages are victims, and of course they're alive and they're suffering, and it is true that the wounded in Israeli hospitals are being taken care of with love, and the hostages are being abused by their Hamas captors. Still, it is very important to remember that the whole country is not standing and saying we have to end the war. That is not true. We're all saying, bring all the hostages home. But some of us say that the way to do it is this way, and others are saying that the way to do it is to capitulate. Obviously, you know what side I'm on. I say, no way to capitulate. It's not only that Hamas will remain in power. It's a signal to Iran. It's a signal to every genocidal jihadist that the best thing you can do is kidnap Israelis. And what's more, it would be enough for Hamas to say, okay, we'll release all the hostages, and then say, oh, but one of them is missing. Because you know what we're like. Even for a single hostage, and that is Gilad Shalit, all those years ago, who spent 5 years in captivity, the whole country went berserk about releasing Gilad Shalit. And that's the way we are, because we care about every individual. But it's because of the deal we made to release him that Yehia Sinwar was released in a prisoner. We released all these bloodthirsty terrorists from Israeli prisons, and we wouldn't have had October 7th if Sinwar had remained in prison. So, you know, we have to really remember who we are and the consequences of just ending the war.
So you're too modest, but I can say it. Your son, who's done more than a few days of reserve duty, he's done a whole series of time in reserves, received a special commendation from the army, and I know you're proud of him. I'll say the following. We've talked about the Holocaust. And you said Hamas is a genocidal terrorist organization. And the truth is, it's not often said, but people should think about that. Because Hamas massacred 1,200 people on October 7th, 2023. Given the capability, instead of 1,200, would they have killed 12,000? And the answer is clearly yes, given the capability they would have. Given the capability, would they have killed 120,000? And what is the answer? Of course they would have. And you can keep going up. In other words, given the capability, let's be frank, they would kill us all. And so they really are a genocidal terrorist organization and should be seen as such. And on the issue of hostages, 100%, we want them all out. But if it's understood by our enemy that having a hostage is a get-out-of-jail-free card, to use the term from Monopoly that we used to play as children, yes, that even, I don't think it's a probability, but even on the chance that Hamas would release all the hostages, and I don't think they will because the hostages are their assets. But even let's presume, for argument's sake, that they would release the hostages. What stops them from taking another hostage 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now? And they've got to get a free card because they understand that if they have a single Israeli hostage, then our arms are tied. We can't fight back. And I think that's something we should think about. If Hamas's demand that the war end and they stay in power, which only allows them to re-establish their control of Gaza. It allows them to rebuild their military machine and then plan another October 7th, yes? We're just back to square one. The people who live on those communities in the south, many of those communities the hostages come from, because besides the people from the Nova Musical Festival, yes, almost everyone else is from the communities along the frontier, yes? They want to rebuild their lives. Can they rebuild their lives? They say we need the hostages back to rebuild our communities. Okay, I accept that. But can you rebuild those communities if Hamas is still in Gaza? Will anyone really want to live in a border community if Hamas is on the other side of the border? In other words, a lot of our public discussion in Israel is unfortunately very polarized and very shrill and very shallow. People don't think through these issues.
You know what? It's not just the border communities. It's not just Hamas. It's a signal to all jihadists. And it's not just about kidnapping Israelis or Jews. It's Americans. You see the kind of deals that America makes with Iran in order to get hostages. This has got to stop. You cannot. Now, we are in a moral dilemma. People with a conscience are in a moral dilemma over this. The jihadists don't have such a moral dilemma, but we do. And that is, well, of course, there's some innocent person is kidnapped. And again, I'm saying not just Jews, anywhere. We saw that with the Yazidis. We see all over the world genocidal actions that somehow the world doesn't pay attention to because they're too focused on accusing Israel of being at fault for all kinds of things, and including accusing us of genocide. But while this is all going on, the idea is you cannot reward that. And so, of course, we have this moral dilemma because, so you say, well, if my child were a hostage in Gaza or anywhere else, how would I feel? And as I said many times, it's possible that I would feel, yeah, I don't care. I don't care about the country or the Jewish people or the West or the world, because that's my kid. And as far as I'm concerned, everybody else can drop dead as long as it could be that I'd feel that way. I don't know. But even if I did, that is not the way you forge policy. It's not the way a government makes decisions based on that. And so I have to say that we have to take into account all the consequences. And those consequences are not far in the future. They're immediate. We see that all the time. We see it happening now. And we see that Iran, and let me tell you, if Iran gets those nukes on its missiles, it's not just that the whole region will change, and all the achievements of this war that Israel made in Syria, in Lebanon, and Gaza, and elsewhere, and in Yemen, all of that will just be undercut, and we'll have very little power against that. And so, again, I have to say that what I take away from Holocaust Remembrance is that we have to win this war. We have to defeat the terrorists. And yes, that will put the hostages at risk. Let's make no mistake about it. We can't pretend otherwise, but I think they're at greater risk, and we all are at greater risk if we don't do that.
So it's clear, and you're correct when you say that by fighting this war, the hostages are in danger. They're in danger that we will accidentally hit them, which has happened in the past.
Or that they'll be executed while...
Or they'll be executed by their Hamas captors if they see Israeli soldiers nearby. And there are risks involved. The question has to be asked, is there a no-risk strategy? If there's a no-risk strategy, it's probably go and live in Denmark or something, yes, maybe it's a nice country, but I don't want to live there, yeah? There is no-risk strategy. It doesn't exist. And when you weigh up the risks of the alternatives, I think what the government has decided is probably quite correct. The idea is this is the best way to get... What motivation does Hamas have to release hostages unless they're under military pressure? I don't think there's another answer to that question.
And not just military pressure, I want to point out.
Yeah.
It's also the humanitarian aid. I know that's yet another thing that the left abroad is accusing Israel of starving the Palestinians. That's nonsense. Hamas is starving. If any Palestinians in Gaza are starving, that's on Hamas. Hamas took all the aid, sold it at exorbitant prices. Do you know that a sack of flour, Hamas is selling a sack of flour for $1,000? Right now, our withholding aid and everything is another form of putting pressure on them. It has nothing to do with starving the population in Gaza. Unfortunately, Hamas has amassed so much aid that it still has a few more weeks' supply, and time is running out for everything.
I want to address something else that you said, and this is the idea that it's not just about the Jews. And this is about, the world security, international security. And here we can go back, because it is Holocaust Remembrance Day, we can, there's the metaphor that the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. Because at the beginning, when Hitler started with his anti-Semitism, so people said that's an internal German problem, it's not an international issue, it's only about the Jews, it's not about us. But like the canary in the coal mine, what happened afterwards? He invaded Poland, he invaded France, he invaded Russia, right? The Jews were the canary. Our screams of, look what's happening to us, was the beginning of something much larger. And I think people across the world need to understand. October 7th was an attack on Jews, though, of course, non-Jews were killed too, and non-Jews were taken hostage too. But it was primarily directed at the Jewish people. And if anyone believes that this sort of militancy, this sort of extremism, this sort of terrorism, if it succeeds against Israel, will stop here and not come and threaten other countries, other democracies, other societies, they are fooling themselves.
Yeah, not just that. It's happening now in Africa. It's happening everywhere. Christians are being slaughtered, non-Muslims, Hindus, they are being slaughtered, raped, burned, all of those atrocities on October 7th. This is a religious political ideology. This is not the fault of the victims. Now, I wish more Israelis would get that into their thick heads as well. You know, as I say, just because we're split politically doesn't mean that we don't that we shouldn't be taking all of this other stuff into account. Now, here's an interesting thing. A study was done that within 10 years, all 10 or 20, I mean, certainly 10, most of the Holocaust survivors will have died in 10 to 15 years. And now, and therefore, it's of utmost importance to keep chronicling their stories and their testimonies. Now, I agree with that, but we're right now still undergoing something like that. And what I'm asking you is, really, so after decades after the Holocaust, it's suddenly, you know, museums everywhere and testimonies. What about right now, the victims of October 7th? Are we going to wait 50 years and then we'll have monuments to the victims of October 7th? Instead of right now saying this is happening under our noses. And I'll tell you, the one big national trauma here is that one thing we said was the modern state of Israel has an army, and that is the guarantee of never again. When we go to the March of the Living and we send our high school students go there to Poland to see the camps, and we say, now we're going there with an air force, with an army. We're not the victims anymore. Well, October 7th showed that this isn't over. And you have to remain vigilant. You can't just put up museums and take people on tours of monuments. You have to be vigilant all the time, clearly, because it didn't go away. It strengthened. Anti-Semitism strengthened. And you said Australia, and America too, a country full of immigrants. And who would have believed that? And so I think that that's the lesson we have to learn, is we have to stop resting on our laurels and remember that this is an ongoing battle, and we can't cede it, because you're right, it's a canary in the coal mine. It'll just, all societies will suffer. But we have to also survive before we can decide how much suffering we're enduring.
So it's clear that we have to be vigilant, that the threats haven't gone away. And the resurgence of anti-Semitism around the world following October 7th is troubling, but maybe it's not unusual, because anti-Semitism is, it's been called correctly, the world's oldest hatred, right? It goes back to even pre-Christian times. And it is, you know, very troubling, and you can become very cynical, and you could say, well, some things don't change, you know? It sometimes, you know, rests a bit or it goes down a bit, but ultimately there's something about hatred for the Jews that it's almost endemic. Yes, it's there. It's Herzl said, the father of modern political Zionism. He said that it's a disease that it appears that there's no cure for. And if people thought education, and look at all these colleges in the West and in the United States where, you know, they're epicenters for this sort of anti-Semitism and so forth. So if some people say, you know, things don't change, So that's true, but it's only half true, because who has changed, Ruthie? The Jews have changed. We have changed. We are now have the ability, the capability to defend ourselves. And we don't have to beg Roosevelt to bomb the camps, because we can do a lot of the bombing ourselves. In other words, the Jewish people, after 1948, re-established sovereignty, re-established the ability to defend themselves. We're no longer a defenseless people. We're no longer a homeless people. We have a sovereign Jewish state which can protect itself. Were terrible mistakes made on October 7th and the period beforehand? Of course. Hamas took us by surprise. Our intelligence should have known in advance. We didn't. Our government leaders should have known in advance. They didn't. We were taking our eye off the ball, and therefore I agree with you totally. We must always remain vigilant to threats. But we have the ability, we have the capability today to protect ourselves, and it's our fault that October 7th happened. We should have been ready for it. We have to be vigilant. That has to be a lesson. That has to be a slap across the face. But that doesn't discount the fundamental change that has happened to the Jewish people. From a defenseless, homeless people, today we are sovereign and we can defend ourselves. And what a change. That is a crucial change in the history of the Jewish people.
Well, I totally agree. But you know what? We're being put to the test right now. Not just October 7th. We have the Islamic Republic of Iran about to put nuclear warheads on ballistic missiles, and one of its aims is to wipe Israel off the map. Now, what are we going to do? Wait for that to happen? You say we're sovereign and we have to defend ourselves, but we're still waiting for Washington. We're figuring out, are there deals? There not deals? There is our flaw. There is our problem, because we didn't preempt what happened in Gaza. There were all signs that was leading up to that. We didn't preempt because we wouldn't have had international legitimacy, supposedly. However, we didn't have legitimacy even after we were viciously attacked. We cannot wait for Iran. Iran already launched 2 strikes on Israel. Thankfully, of course, they didn't have nuclear weapons on them. They were ballistic missiles. Thankfully, all Israelis ran to their bomb shelters, etc. We have to act against Iran now, before it's too late, whether Washington agrees with it or not. And right now, we're in really good terms with Washington, unlike with the Biden administration. Of course, there are different voices in Washington, but what I'm saying is, when you say we now with the Jewish people now is capable, well, only a year and a half ago, October 7th happened. Iran is about to happen. So it is time. And I don't know if that means tonight or next week. But if it doesn't happen, then we haven't changed.
So I agree that this is an issue. It is probably the most important issue of 2025. I think it's right to take into account American opinions, especially since the administration is particularly friendly. I think the Prime Minister he's doing the right thing in taking that into account. But at the same time, he knows that the security of Israel ultimately is on his shoulders. And the government of Israel is responsible for the security of Israel. And though we should take into account if the Americans say, well, you have to wait, as was reported, I'm not sure it's a wrong decision to wait, because it's important, I think, if it's possible to do this together with America or with strong American support, it's probably better than the other alternative. But acting alone, in the case that there's no other choice, of course we should act alone. The idea that, we talk about Hamas being a genocidal organization, that the Ayatollahs in Iran, who've openly said that Israel should be destroyed, that we shouldn't be here, the country should be obliterated, their words, yes? In that sort of situation, that they should have nuclear weapons, the marriage between that sort of extremist ideology and nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, that is something that Israel can't afford. In the past, we've dealt effectively with the nuclear program of Saddam Hussein's Iraq and the nuclear program of Assad's Syria. If push comes to shove, I think it's incumbent upon us to do something about it. I think better together with the United States, but if not alone, and maybe because of the problems Iran has suffered. They've lost allies in Lebanon and Syria. They've lost the ability, their air defenses through the Israeli counterstrikes. Maybe the coming months is the right time to finally dismantle the Iranian nuclear program.
The coming months? We keep hearing that they're way closer than that. We don't have months. We don't have months. And if a deal if a deal is struck between the United States and Iran, that'll make it even worse. It'll make it harder for Israel to do it because it'll be going against our ally. We have to do it before any deal is signed. If a deal is signed, we're in big trouble because that deal, according to Trump administration officials, is to let's say, prevent nuclear weapons. It's the whole nuclear program that has to be destroyed. It's not just the nuclear weapons. They cannot be allowed to have it. We have to destroy their facilities. And you say, oh, no, we have to wait. Well, as I say, you realize that to give them even the benefit of the doubt, which I don't want to do, the authorities prior to October 7th, our intelligence, our army, never mind the politicians. The idea was we don't preempt because if we start something, then it'll escalate, and that was a huge mistake. We can't make the same mistake with Iran because you know what? Hamas is as dangerous and awful as those terrorists are. They're nothing. They're little thugs compared to Iran. We can't allow that to happen. And if we do, then we haven't learned any lesson.
So we're running out of time, but I'll just finish up by saying I believe that it has to be done. I said 2025 is the year that this problem has to be taken care of. I said also that I think maybe optimal conditions exist now to do it, precisely for the regional context and the fact that Iran is, and that it would be a mistake maybe to let this unique historical moment pass. I believe all that. And what is the bottom line? Iran's nuclear program must be dismantled, not just frozen, dismantled. That can be done through military means. That can be done maybe, question mark, through diplomatic means, depending on what the Americans do. But either way, maybe if the administration makes a sincere effort to try to get a deal and the Iranians don't agree to a peaceful deal, that gives you legitimacy to hit and destroy the program militarily. Either way, whatever path you choose in the end, this year has to end with Iran's nuclear program dismantled.
Well, on that note, which is either optimistic or pessimistic, depending on how you look at it, I would like to say that anybody who enjoyed this broadcast, please like and subscribe, and the next time we do our podcast will be at JNS's first International Policy Summit. So anybody who's watching who will be attending, we'll see you there.
And I'll see you there, Ruthie.
Indeed.